My name is Daniel Reyes, and 3 months ago, my father stood in front of 40 relatives at our family barbecue, held up his beer, and said the words that ended our relationship as I knew it. "The vacation is for family," he said, smiling like he was announcing good news. Without Daniel. 40 people, 40 witnesses, and I was the one who had paid for that vacation. I want to tell you exactly what happened, from the beginning, because by the end of this video, I think you'll understand why I did what I did next, and why, even now, I don't regret a single second of it. If you're new here, this is a true-to-life story, names changed for privacy, and if you enjoy it, stick around till the end because the ending is not what you'd expect. Let's get into it. Part 1. The family I thought I had. I'm 34 years old. I run a small logistics consulting business out of Denver, Colorado, and for the last 6 years, business has been good. Not by a yacht good, but good enough that I could finally do something I'd wanted to do since I was a teenager. Take my entire extended family on a real vacation. Not a weekend at a lake house. A real one, 10 days in Portugal, a rented villa in the Algarve, flights included, all expenses covered by me. My family is big and loud in the way that Midwestern transplant families get when they all end up settling near each other in Colorado. My parents, Robert and Linda Reyes. My 2 younger siblings, Marcus and Ellie. My Aunt Carol and her husband, Pete. My cousins, Jake and Sophia. And my grandmother, Nana Rosa, who is 81 and the actual glue holding this family together, whether anyone admits it or not. I planned this trip for almost a year. I built a spreadsheet, yes, an actual spreadsheet, because that's who I am with flights, villa costs, car rentals, and a shared activities budget. The total came out to just under $31,000. I didn't ask anyone to pay me back. I didn't want a cent. I wanted for once to be the person who gave something enormous to the people who raised me and grew up beside me. I called it the Reyes Family Reunion Fund. I opened a dedicated account, wired in the money in 2 installments, and sent everyone a group message in March explaining the plan. Everyone was thrilled. My mother cried on the phone. My dad said, and I quote, "Son, this is the kind of thing that makes a father proud." I want you to remember that line. Keep it in your head. We're coming back to it. For the next 4 months, that group chat was the happiest place in my life. Ellie found a beach town nobody knew about. Jake kept sending villa photos. Nana Rosa started asking about the exchange rate for euros like she was going to personally haggle with vendors, which, knowing her, she absolutely was. Then in July, 3 weeks before the trip, everything changed. Part 2, the first crack. It started small. My dad called me on a Tuesday night, and his voice had that careful tone people use right before they say something they've rehearsed. "Daniel," he said, "your mother and I have been thinking maybe it'd be good if this trip was just family, close family, you understand." I remember sitting there in my kitchen, phone against my ear, genuinely confused. "Dad, I am family. This is my trip. I planned it. I'm the one who." I know, he cut in. "It's not about that, it's about Jessica." And there it was. Jessica is my partner. We'd been together for 3 years at that point, living together for 2. My family had met her a dozen times. She'd spent 2 Thanksgivings with us. She'd helped Nana Rosa can tomatoes in the backyard the previous summer, an activity Nana does not allow just anyone to participate in. But there had always been a quiet, simmering tension between my father and Jessica that I'd chosen to ignore because I didn't want to believe it was real. My dad is a traditionalist in ways that don't always translate well into the present decade. Jessica is outspoken, successful in her own right as an architect, and does not shrink herself to make men in the room comfortable. My father, I came to understand far too late, found that unforgivable in a woman he hadn't personally approved of through some invisible ritual only he understood. "Dad, Jessica's coming. She's part of my life. She's basically part of this family." "She's not blood, Daniel." I actually laughed because I thought he was joking. He wasn't. "Neither is Pete," I said. "Neither is Sophia's husband. You've never had a problem with in-laws before." There was a long pause, and then my father said something that, looking back, was the real thesis of everything that came after. This is different. I don't like how she talks to your mother. I don't like the way she disagrees with things in front of people. I raised you a certain way, Daniel, and I don't like watching you become someone who lets a woman run the show. I sat with that sentence for a long time after we hung up. I want to be clear with you. My father is not a cruel man in the cartoonish sense. He didn't scream. He didn't threaten. He spoke softly, reasonably, the way people do when they've convinced themselves they're being wise instead of controlling. That, I've learned, is often more dangerous than shouting. It's harder to fight because it doesn't look like a fight. It looks like concern. I told him Jessica was coming. He said we'd talk about it later. I should have known later meant he was regrouping, not reconsidering. Part 3, the quiet campaign. Over the following 2 weeks, I started noticing things. My mother, normally the one who called me every few days just to talk, went quiet. When I did get her on the phone, she sounded evasive, answering questions about the trip with vague, non-committal responses instead of her usual enthusiasm. My brother Marcus texted me one night, "Hey, has Dad said anything weird to you about the trip?" I asked what he meant. He called me and asked if it'd be okay if it was just us this year. I said, "What about Jess?" and he changed the subject. Then my cousin Jake mentioned, almost in passing during a phone call about something unrelated, that my dad had asked him if he thought the group would be more comfortable without certain people there. I want you to notice what was happening. My father wasn't confronting me. He was going around me, building a quiet consensus among the people I loved, testing the waters with each of them individually, gathering support before he ever had to face me directly. It's a strategy I've seen since in workplaces and politics, and it never looks less ugly no matter where you find it. I called Jessica's mother. No, actually, I called Jessica first, because at this point I owed her the full truth of what was happening in my own family. She listened quietly. When I finished, she was calm in a way that surprised me. "Daniel, if this is going to cause a rift in your family..." "I don't need to go. I really don't." "No," I told her. "Absolutely not. This isn't about the trip. This is about whether my father gets to decide who I build my life with. If I let this slide now, it never stops." I didn't know, yet, how right that instinct would turn out to be. Part 4, the family barbecue. 3 weeks before departure, we had our annual end-of-July barbecue at my parents' house. 40-some people, family, neighbors, my dad's old coworkers he still calls the boys. Burgers, a rented popcorn machine my mother insists on every year, my nephews running through a sprinkler. I brought Jessica, obviously. I brought her because she is my partner, and because I refuse to let my father's quiet campaign dictate my behavior in my own family. For the first hour, everything was normal. And then my dad, 3 beers in, climbed up on the low deck step at the edge of the yard, a spot he uses every year to make some kind of toast, and called for everyone's attention. I remember the exact moment. The sun was low, throwing that orange late afternoon light across the yard. Someone had just turned the music down. My dad raised his beer. "I want to say something about the trip everyone's so excited about," he started, and I felt my stomach drop before he even continued, because I recognized that tone. That was his announcement voice. "We've been so blessed this year to have this opportunity, thanks to Daniel." A small round of applause. I didn't move. "And I want everyone to know," he continued, "that this trip, this vacation, it's for family." He paused and looked, very deliberately, past me, at Jessica standing beside me holding a paper plate of coleslaw. "Without Daniel." For a second, I genuinely thought I'd misheard him. The yard went quiet in that specific way. A room goes quiet when everyone realizes something has gone wrong and nobody knows whether to react. "I mean," he corrected himself, catching the confusion on people's faces, "without outside additions, just us, family." He said it like a save. It wasn't a save. 40 people had just heard my father announce at a party in front of my siblings, my grandmother, my cousins, and my partner, that the vacation I had planned and paid for every flight, every night in that villa, every euro of the activities budget, was for family. Without me and the woman I loved, spoken in the same breath as if we were the same category of unwelcome. Nobody clapped. My mother's face had gone the particular shade of pale she gets when she knows something has gone very wrong, and there is nothing she can do to unsay it. Nana Rosa, 81 years old and sharper than anyone gives her credit for, set down her drink. I didn't yell, I didn't cause a scene. I looked at my father and I said calmly, "Got it," and I walked Jessica to the car. We didn't say much on the drive home. She reached over at one point and put her hand on my arm and said, "You don't have to decide anything tonight." She was wrong about that. I had already decided. Part 5, The Freeze. The next morning, I logged into the Ray's Family Reunion Fund account. Here's something important you need to understand about how I'd structured this trip financially, because it's the entire reason what happened next was even possible. I hadn't just paid vendors directly and been done with it. I'd set it up deliberately as a staged payment structure. Flights booked and paid in full. Yes, those were locked. But the villa deposit had been paid, with the remaining balance and the entire activities and group experience budget sitting in a dedicated account that released funds on a schedule I controlled, specifically because I wanted flexibility in case plans changed, guest counts shifted, or anything needed adjusting before the trip. In other words, the flights were gone, but roughly $18,000, the villa balance, the car rentals, the excursions, the private chef I'd booked for 2 nights, the everything else that makes a trip like this feel like an event instead of just a flight somewhere, all of it was still sitting in an account with my name on it, scheduled to disperse in 9 days. I picked up my phone, opened the banking app, and froze every scheduled disbursement. Then I sent one message to the family group chat. Not an angry one, not a single insult. I wrote, "After last night, I think it's clear this trip isn't what I intended it to be. I've paused the remaining payments, villa balance, cars, activities, the chef, while I figure out what happens next. Flights are already booked and can't be changed. Everything else is on hold indefinitely." Then I turned my phone on silent and went to work. By the time I checked it again, 6 hours later, I had 11 missed calls and 43 messages. Part 6, The Fallout. I want to walk you through the reactions, because I think they tell you everything about where each person in my family actually stood, and some of them surprised me. My mother's first message was panicked, not angry. "Daniel, please call me. We need to talk about this before it gets worse. Your father didn't mean it like that." My father's first message, 4 hours later, was not an apology. It was, "This is exactly the kind of overreaction I was talking about. You're going to punish the entire family, your grandmother, your siblings, because of one comment." I read that message probably 6 times, because there it was again, the same move he'd made at the barbecue itself. Turn the thing he did into the thing I was doing. I hadn't stood up in front of 40 people and excluded anyone. I had frozen funds I owned in my account after being publicly humiliated in front of my entire family. But somehow, in his framing, I was the one holding the family hostage. Marcus, my brother, called me that night. He didn't defend Dad. "I was standing right next to him," he said. "I saw Jessica's face. I saw yours. You didn't do anything wrong last night. I don't think you're doing anything wrong today either." Ellie texted me a single line. Finally, someone said no to him. That one hit harder than I expected, because it told me this wasn't new. It told me my father had been doing versions of this, quiet ultimatums, sudden redrawn lines about who belonged and who didn't long before it landed on me. I just hadn't been on the receiving end before. Nana Rosa called me on the landline she still insists on keeping. Her voice was steady. "Daniel," she said, "I raised your father better than this. I want you to know that whatever you decide, I am with you. Not the trip, you." Aunt Carol, on the other hand, texted the group chat a long message about how money shouldn't come between family, and how I was being too sensitive, conveniently leaving out that her husband Pete, an in-law himself, was, by my father's own logic from that podium, exactly the kind of outside addition my father claimed the trip wasn't for. Nobody pointed that out to her. I didn't need to. Nana Rosa did it for me in the group chat, in about 4 sentences, and Carol did not respond after that. For 3 days, my father did not call me directly. He called Marcus. He called Ellie. He called my mother's sister. Everyone but me. The same quiet campaign strategy as before, except now the campaign wasn't about excluding Jessica. It was about pressuring me into unfreezing the money without ever having to actually apologize for what he'd said. On day 4, he finally called me himself. Part 7, the call. "You've made your point," he said when I picked up. "No hello. Can we move on now? The trip is in 2 weeks. "What point do you think I'm making, Dad?" "That you're upset. Fine, I get it. It came out wrong at the barbecue. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. You said the vacation was for family, without me, in front of 40 people. How many ways can that sound?" There was a long pause, the kind where I could practically hear him deciding whether to actually reckon with what he'd said or find a new way around it. "I meant without certain outsiders changing the dynamic," he said. "You're twisting it." "I'm not twisting anything, Dad. I have it on video. Jake filmed part of the toast on his phone before you said it. You can watch it back if your memory needs help." Another pause, longer this time. "So what do you want?" he finally said. "You want me to beg? You want an apology in writing?" "I want you to actually understand what you did, not perform an apology to get your vacation back. Understand it." "I'm 61 years old, Daniel. I'm not going to be lectured about how to talk in my own backyard." And there it was, the real him, underneath the careful, reasonable tone he usually used. Not remorse, wounded authority. The idea that a father's word, however it landed, was simply not something that should require reckoning at all. "Then I guess the money stays frozen," I said. "Because I'm not funding a trip where my partner and I get treated like optional extras by the person who's supposed to walk me down the aisle someday, assuming that's still something you want to be part of." I hung up before he could answer that. Part 8, the offer. 2 days later, my mother came to see me alone. No calls this time. She showed up at my apartment on a Saturday morning, and I let her in because whatever else was happening, she wasn't the one who'd said the words at that barbecue. She sat at my kitchen table, and for the first time in this whole ordeal, she cried in front of me. "I should have said something that night," she said. "I saw your face. I saw Jessica's face. I just froze. Your father has a way of making a room feel like arguing with him is the same as attacking the whole family, and I've spent 36 years learning how to just survive that instead of fighting it. I want to be honest with you. That was the moment this stopped feeling like a fight I was having with my father and started feeling like something much older and sadder than that. My mother wasn't defending him because she agreed with him. She was defending him because disagreeing, in her experience, cost more than it was worth. And somewhere in there, I understood, with a kind of grief I hadn't expected, that this was probably the first time in a very long time someone in this family had refused to pay that cost. "I'm not trying to punish you or Ellie or Marcus or Nana," I told her. "I'm trying to make sure Dad understands that what he did has an actual consequence, instead of a consequence-shaped apology that fixes nothing." My mother nodded slowly. "What would make it right?" "An actual apology. To Jessica, specifically, not a group text. And an understanding, actually stated, not implied, that she's welcome in this family the same as any other partner who's ever joined it. Not a tolerance. A welcome." She left that afternoon and didn't say whether she thought he'd do it. Part 9, Nana ROSA's move. What actually broke the standoff wasn't my father. It was my grandmother. 4 days after my mother's visit, Nana Rosa called a family meeting at her house. An actual meeting, the kind she used to call when I was a kid and someone had done something that required airing, as she puts it. My father showed up because you do not skip one of Nana Rosa's meetings, not at 61, not ever. I wasn't there, but Marcus told me everything afterward, and Ellie confirmed every detail separately, which is how I know it's accurate and not exaggerated for my benefit. Nana Rosa apparently sat my father down in her kitchen, in front of my mother, Marcus, and Ellie, and said something close to this. "Robert, I watched you grow up in a house where my husband decided who belonged at our table, and I watched what that did to you and your brothers. I did not raise you to become him, But that is exactly who stood up at that barbecue. According to Marcus, my father tried to argue his usual line, that it wasn't about excluding Jessica, that people were overreacting, and Nana Rosa cut him off with a single sentence that apparently ended the conversation entirely. "Robert, I am 81 years old. Do not waste what time I have left pretending with me." My father left that meeting quieter than anyone had ever seen him. 2 days later, he called me, not my mother relaying a message, not a group text. He called me himself. Part 10, the apology. "I owe you a real conversation," he said. "Not a defense, just a conversation." I let him talk. "I think I've spent so long believing that keeping this family a certain way, held together a certain way, was my job. My only job, really. The one thing I was supposed to get right, that I stopped noticing when holding it together turned into deciding who got to stay in it. I did that to Jessica. And by doing it to her, I did it to you." It wasn't a perfect apology. There was still a version of him underneath it that clearly believed his intentions had been fundamentally decent, even if the outcome hadn't been. But it was the most honest thing he'd said to me in the entire 3 weeks since that barbecue, and I've learned that honest but imperfect is worth more than polished but hollow. "I'd like to actually apologize to Jessica," he said. "In person, not because it fixes the trip, because it's the right thing whether the trip happens or not." He did. 2 days later at our house, over coffee, with no audience, no performance, no 40 witnesses to manage his image in front of. It was awkward and a little stiff, and Jessica, to her enormous credit, accepted it with more grace than I think I would have managed in her position. She told him plainly that she didn't need him to love her, only to respect that Daniel had chosen her, permanently. And that any future that didn't include that reality wasn't a future she or I were interested in being part of. He said he understood. I believed him more than I expected to. Part 11, what I decided. Here's the part I know some of you are waiting for. Did I unfreeze the money? Did the trip happen? I want to be honest about my reasoning, because I think it matters more than the outcome itself. I did unfreeze the funds, but not immediately, and not unconditionally. I waited until after the apology to Jessica had actually happened in person, not promised. I waited until my father, unprompted, texted the family group chat himself, not through my mother, not through Marcus. An actual message acknowledging what he'd said at the barbecue and stating clearly that Jessica was welcome on the trip and welcome in this family, full stop. Only then did I release the remaining balance. The villa, the cars, the activities, the chef, all of it went through with 4 days to spare before departure. The trip happened. 10 days in the Algarve, exactly as planned, except for one addition nobody had budgeted for. My father, on the 3rd night, pulled Jessica aside on the villa's terrace, and according to her, because I wasn't there for this part either, told her that watching her handle the whole situation with more patience than he deserved had taught him something about the kind of partner his son had actually found. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was quiet and a little clumsy and completely sincere. Part 12, the lesson. I've thought a lot in the months since about why I froze that money instead of just yelling at the barbecue, or quietly stewing, or giving my father the silent treatment the way people in families often do when they're hurt, but don't want to make a scene. Here's what I've landed on. Words in my family had always been negotiable. My father could say something devastating and then, days later, reframe it, soften it, argue it never meant what everyone heard. Feelings could be talked around. Apologies could be implied instead of stated. But money I controlled in an account with my name on it was not negotiable in the same way. It was a fact. It didn't argue back. It didn't require me to convince anyone I was right. It simply sat there, frozen, until the thing that needed to happen happened. I'm not telling you to weaponize money against your family. That's not the lesson here. The lesson is this. If you've built something, a trip, a gift, a gesture of love, out of your own resources, for your own reasons, you are allowed to protect it when the people you built it for use it as a stage to humiliate you. You are allowed to say, not like this, with actions, when words alone keep getting reinterpreted into something more comfortable for the person who hurt you. My father and I are not perfect now, We still have moments where his old instincts show up, a comment here, an assumption there, and I've learned to say something the moment it happens instead of letting it build for 3 weeks and 40 witnesses. But he apologizes now. Actually apologizes, not the performance, the real thing. And every time I think back to that barbecue, his beer raised, the orange evening light, the sentence that ended with, "Without Daniel," I don't feel angry anymore. I feel like that was the moment I finally decided my seat at the table wasn't something anyone else got to revoke, not even him. Outra. If you made it this far, thank you for spending 40 minutes with me and my family's mess. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever had to draw a line with someone who was supposed to protect you instead of testing you, let me know in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want more stories like this, make sure you're subscribed, because there are more where this came from. I'll see you in the next one. End of script.